Welcome to the Animus. Looking for game sessions.
The anima is a personification of all feminine psychological tendencies in a man's psyche, such as vague feelings and moods, prophetic hunches, receptiveness to the irrational, capacity for personal love, feeling for nature, and, last but not least, his relation to the unconscious. It is no mere chance that in olden times priestesses, like the Greek Sibyl, were used to fathom the divine will and to make connection with the gods.
The young adventurer seeking enlightenment always finds themselves in a predicament of acknowledging an existence of a higher power or a higher consciousness. The acceptance and awareness of a being, deity or unexplainable existence that is all-seeing, all-knowing and all-powerful. In religion, this concept is an attribute of the religion's creator, a proposed God that created mankind and existence. In religion, the follower's goal is to emulate the will of the Creator in an effort to be as the Creator and its will. In atheism, the individual seeks to see themselves as the creator of its own will, believing that existence is its own creator, without the presence of a creator of all creators. It does not come to a surprise that each path, or the combination of each path, involves the progression of the intrigued desire to know how one can be at its optimum within its sect or belief. And it is no secret that at the highest levels of each path, the practice of the worship of sex is profound and a necessity in the progression and maintenance of the desire to reach the optimum of one's believed path of existence. Sex is an act of communication. Although it is used also to conceive and to reproduce, and of course, by many people for the purpose of pleasure, the act in itself is to communicate to the other partner your current attitude and relationship with them and the world. Sex as a form of communication has been described as to know, since post-exilic, Hellenistic period from 3rd to 2nd centuries BC. This period dates the conception of some of the first books of the Bible, and it is written in the opening book called Genesis. And Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived. Here it was described in the Bible, by the authors of the time as they knew it, and this was to know or he knew. The Bible describes sex in this way, to show that through the act, the partners communicated to each other their attitudes and relationship towards them, and they were able to know them. Since the way the act is performed be it passionate, lustful, love, violent, experienced, strength, attitudes, threat, aggressive, the partners are able through this act to know the state of mind and worldly experience of the other, without words. Here we understand sex as a tool for communication.
On my very first day here, I met a group of temple prostitutes who told me about this ancient Hindu system where prepubescent girls are dedicated to a goddess, and for the rest of their lives they will become sex slaves of the temple. The name of that system is Devadasi. So in the beginning, being a Devadasi had nothing to do with prostitution. In medieval India, they were glamorous temple dancers and held high social status. They performed sacred religious rituals and danced for royalty in the name of a goddess called Yelama.
It's the fifth bread of Satan, and my power that I ran with was, my element was fire, and you couldn't get any higher than what I was. I could move things without touching them, and I could make people stand away from me and command the demons to go get people and make them get pushed away. I could protect myself in that sort of way, and I really liked the power. I was really involved with the satanic church every day. The high priest would come and get me, and they would take me to the church, and they would violate me.
So the ancient sacredly sexual priestesses belonged to the realm of the religion of the goddess. To be a sacredly sexual priestess was to experience and feel the life force. So I want to say that essentially every priestess was a sacredly sexual priestess. And that is because every priestess was working from a place of that deep knowing and a relationship to that profound life force. Some of the most enlightened beings I've ever encountered were the nymphs. Full wisdom, absolute access to all knowledge and understanding. They were the original oracles, and it was because they were in touch with this communion they had with this life force, which they thought of as the goddess. Or one more note, I do refer to the priestesses because they were lineages of women. The sacredly sexual priestesses were embodiments of the goddess. And they weren't just, women who sort of hid out in the temple and fulfilled needs or something. They were the leaders.
You see a lot of gods with huge erections, you see deities having sex, but Egyptian temples are very much enclosed spaces, which very few people would have access to.
Central to the tombs was the idea that when you died, your body would need to go to the afterlife. The tombs were portals, and sex would be an important part of that transition.
It is a picture of the ideal occasion in real life. In order to be reborn, you have to have these sexual activities that goes before any birth or rebirth.
Revealing a sexual side to the gods, sex was deeply ingrained into religious beliefs.
The whole of Egyptian society is certainly based around sex in the sense that they understood its importance and its significance, and that without the sexual act, their society wouldn't continue.
Sex was also central to ancient Egyptian creation myths. Contained within the British Museum is an ancient papyrus which shows how the Egyptians believed their gods performed sexual acts to create the world. It's a rare piece of evidence which reveals that sex formed a magical and mystical aspect to religious beliefs in ancient Egypt. The goddess known as Hathor, the daughter of the sun god Ra, was the most important deity in one's sexual life. She was the goddess of physical love and spiritual love.
There was one object that was particularly important in the cult of Hathor, and that's what's called the sistrum, a sacred rattle, which has a picture of Hathor on it. And whenever anybody rattled and made a noise with such a sistrum, it meant that the goddess was present, she was there.
It is not only the Greek upper class that practiced channeling the goddesses into their priestesses, but this practice was originally taught to the Greeks by the Egyptian kings of the 5th century BC, where it is documented by Greek's infamous historian Herodotus, who noted a native of Samos by the name of Pythagoras, who traveled frequently to Egypt for the purpose of his education. He had secured consent of the priests, Animasus, king of Egypt. The king's chief warrior Polycrates gave Pythagoras letters of introduction to the king, who secured for him an introduction to the 3 high priests of Egypt. After severe trials, he was initiated into all their secrets. He learned the doctrine of metempsychosis, medicine, the dietetic rules, geometry, mathematics, and the combination of these sciences led to what is now known today as Greek mythology, the belief in gods and goddesses. Transeuchithian magic is carried out in order to reach Transeuchithian space, also known as Trans-Plutonian space and Universe B. The knowledge of the existence of these dimensions come from the ancient cult of the star Sirius. Sirius is located in the constellation Canis Major, also known as the Big Dog, and is therefore known as a dog star. It is over 20 times brighter than our Sun, and is twice as massive. Artifacts of ancient civilizations have revealed that Sirius was of a great importance in astronomy, mythology, and occultism. Egyptians' entire religious system was revolved around Sirius. It was revered as Sothis and was associated with Isis, the mother goddess of Egyptian mythology.
They believe that they are accessing alternate universes, alternate realities where they can become as gods. There is a belief that through this sexual perversion, they can access these tunnels into alternate universes, alternate realities. This buys into the modern day physics theory that there's many, many dimensions of reality. Maybe you've read about that. Alternate universes. It shows up in science fiction a lot. And this broad genre of magic is called Transeuchithian magic. And all that means is it's magic that goes into trans-Plutonian space. Space beyond the planet Pluto, which they believe is beyond the pale of the sun and therefore beyond the pale of the Judeo-Christian God. They believe there are gods out beyond Pluto that are far more powerful and far more dangerous and far more deadly than either God or the devil.
Through the practice of sex magic, the priests and kings would know God.
In its individual manifestation, the character of a man's anima is as a rule shaped by his mother. If he feels that his mother had a negative influence on him, his anima will often express itself in irritable, depressed moods, uncertainty, insecurity, and touchiness. If, however, he is able to overcome the negative assaults on himself, they can even serve to reinforce his masculinity. The Greek sirens, or the German Lorelei, also personify this dangerous aspect of the anima, which in this form symbolizes destructive illusion. If, on the other hand, a man's experience of his mother has been positive, this can also affect his anima in typical but different ways, with the result that he either becomes effeminate or is preyed upon by women, and thus is unable to cope with the hardships of life.
The young adventurer who now understands the priority of the woman becomes eager to acquire the attributes of the feminine psyche. To acquire all that is the strength of a woman whilst still conveying his masculinity, physically and emotionally. In the case of a woman, she now comes face to face to the importance of her role as a feminine being, where her attributes are now to be preserved, strengthened and controlled. The young adventurer asks themselves, in third person, what is the benefit of a woman and what is it that one can gain? The essence of a man. The masculine role has its importance in the foundations of the development of society. Figuratively speaking, the goal of a man should be to become alpha, where the alpha man is strong and able to defend themselves, be it through strength or logic. This comes from the innate desire to dominate and reproduce. You see the domination of man in war, in the workplace and what is known as the industrial industry, the building blocks of safety and certainty. With this foundation of the essence of a man, he is now more favorable as a candidate in the process of reproduction and as a character of protection. However, the alpha male is limited, as even though he may be desired more favorably, he is without the feminine attributes and will find it difficult to connect and relate to the female. This state is now the lack of the beta. Here it is understood that the beta is not a regressive state to the male. The beta man has been described as a man who is still in his childlike state of mind, where they are focused on doing what others want them to do. They are known as too nice, people pleasers, avoids conflict, resentful, passive-aggressive, sensitive and emotional, seeker of approval, hiding mistakes and does not put themselves first. These attributes without the alpha are negative in a male, however, in contrast, are strengths in a female, to a degree. When compared to a female, these attributes are vital in the female role of society. This is known as the yin-yang balance of infinity, and these attributes coincide with each other and, most importantly, relate to the physical makeup of a male and a female and not only exclusive to the state of mind.
Think of masculinity as an energy that is going outward, pushing outward. And this energy is all about penetration into the world. And it's about imposing yourself onto the world. Dominating the world, you might say. Now, this is like an attitude. It's an orientation towards life. It doesn't just happen in the bedroom, although, of course, in the bedroom it's very, very pronounced, and it's extremely obvious and undeniable there. But it also happens in more subtle shades in the way that a man carries himself, the way he talks, the way he makes jokes, the way he interacts with people, the way he does business. That's masculine. Now, feminine, what is that? That's the polar opposite. So if masculine is pushing out, feminine is soaking in. It's soaking up life. It's kind of being at the cause of things, and it's flowing with life. And it's flowing with emotions, and it's receiving or surrendering to life. Now again, that's a generalization, but that's a pretty nice way to generalize feminine energy. So let's talk a little bit about the science behind this. One of the things, if you start doing research into the biology of the mind and the brain and the physiology of the male and female body, is you start to see that there are really big differences. Not just physically, but internally with the brain. So our brains are literally wired differently. And there's a really great book called The Red Queen, which tackles a lot of the biology and the physiology behind male and female differences. And there's a lot of depth in that book, which I can only scratch the surface of here, but I'll mention a couple of really important studies. One of the most important studies, or things that they've discovered, is that when the human being is born, when it's just conceived, it's not even out of the womb yet, already it has a certain physiology to the brain. And what they discovered is that the default human brain is the emotional brain, which, in other words, is the female brain. That's the default brain. Now, how do you get the male mind? To get the male mind, what needs to happen is you need to inject that female mind as it's developing with testosterone. Testosterone is the male hormone. So, this is a really cool thing, because what it tells you is that the brains are actually literally different. The female brain is more like holistic, because that severing of the hemispheres hasn't happened. So the left and right, they are more kind of like working together on problems. And the male mind, or the male brain, is more about specialization. So you have the left and right hemispheres specializing for particular purposes. And this can be seen in various studies that you can do on men and women. That's what it's wired for. It's wired for modeling the world. That's what the man does most of his life, is he walks around modeling the world. That's his thing. Have you noticed that about men? That's what men do. It's funny. Now, what about the women's brains? Women's brains are wired more for emotional thinking and loving and empathizing and relating to other human beings. That's what emotional acuity gets you, is the better ability to relate and interact with other human beings. Well, what they discovered for women is that women have slightly higher verbal skills, generally speaking, than men do. And then, of course, women's minds are much better at understanding subtle emotional cues. And in a sense, you might say that femininity is all about like being in touch with your intuitive nature, right? It's not about rationally needing to figure everything out sometimes, the way men want to do. It's more about just kind of going with the flow and also being in touch with your emotions and your feelings and using that as a guide. And that's a valid way to guide yourself. One problem with autism, also Asperger's syndrome, is another form of that. The way that happens is that you get the male mind, but then it goes hyper-masculine. It becomes hyper-logical, and it becomes autistic. It turns into a disorder. What's interesting, though, is that if you compare the male mind to the female mind, what the male mind is just a slightly more autistic female mind. And this is exactly what makes men behave like men. This is exactly what makes men a little bit more detached, a little bit less emotional, a little bit less needy, a little bit more like assholes, or a little bit more cold-hearted than women. And why is that good? Well, that's good because that allows the man to go out and like fight a war, right? Pretty helpful for that, to be detached from emotions. If you care about people so much, then you probably won't want to slit their throats or bayonet them in the gut. So that helps for that. Now, with women, they're more emotional and empathetic. What does that help with? That helps with nurturing children.
The essence of a woman. Compared to the masculine man, the female is more in touch with the emotional and spiritual. What is known as the amygdala gland is bigger and more receptive in the female. Here we discover that the benefits of the feminine psyche include communicating and deciphering body language, nurturing and caring, emotionally and physically tolerant, increase in awareness of nature and the surroundings, and of course, spiritually dominant. Once the male is capable of accepting and understanding the female psyche to be a much more dominant and proactive state of receptive thinking, and as a powerful communicative device, the male is more willing to implement the female psyche as a desired goal into their own existence, whether it be innate or as an ally.
An anima of this sort can turn men into sentimentalists, or they may become as touchy as old maids, or as sensitive as the fairy tale princess who could feel a pea under 30 mattresses. The anima in this guise involves men in a destructive intellectual game. We can notice the effect of this anima trick in all those neurotic pseudo-intellectual dialogues that inhibit a man from getting into direct touch with life and its real decisions. He reflects about life so much that he cannot live it, and loses all his spontaneity and outgoing feeling. The most frequent manifestation of the anima takes the form of erotic fantasy. Men may be driven to nurse their fantasies by looking at films and striptease shows, or by daydreaming over pornographic material. This is a crude, primitive aspect of the anima, which becomes compulsive only when a man does not sufficiently cultivate his feeling relationships, when his feeling attitude toward life has remained infantile.
The position of the female is to guide herself towards the nature of the world. In doing so, the woman becomes aware and in tune with the path of creation. This is also known as a great work. It is important to know that the great work has no allegiance. However, it is innate within the female to guide her being into a state of development. Once the female understands morality and progression, she will draw herself into a place of creation. This is where the great work begins. In this stage, the female will attract what is necessary for her to participate in the great work. Attraction will include but not exclusive to people, means, be it financial, assets or knowledge. Continuing, attraction will include opportunities and divinity. The great work, also known as the magnum opus, is the devotion to the highest good. The goal of the great work is to deny the positive existence of evil. However, the definition or judgment of evil is not to be perceived by the human psyche. Therefore, it is important to acknowledge evil as a disruptor of the great work. Here we understand the great work as a collective of human desire. When the female has gained control of her being and decided on her path, the female in this position will choose the path that most correlates with her state of mind. This may be progressive destruction or absolute progression. The choice will determine the state of the male, as the man of the earth, in all respect, responds to the female of the earth as guidance of existence, as it is innate for the male to seek approval of the female. In order to gain favorability, this creates an inner self-acknowledgement of dominance, whilst it is the female that forces the male to seek approval, for the purpose of the male to have a sense of dominance. This is vital to complete the yin-yang balance, in order for the male to be appropriated to his spiritual role in the female-dominated reality. We clearly see the male as a tool for roles that are inhibited to the female capacity, making the male existence a necessity. Therefore, it is important as a male to inherit the female psyche in order to contribute to the great work. The female psyche is designed to facilitate the existence of the great work. It is through the female that the male is able to be acknowledged by the great work. The purpose of the great work is the purpose of the human being.
We have to understand that Jesus and Christ have multiple layers symbolically, and it is the Christ light that returns to the divine male twin soul that gives the name Jesus and Christ a connection with the Son. This is why we see such reverence for the Son of God, because it is the Christ light that illuminates within the divine male, who is the Ark of the Covenant. The Lamb of God is God returning a part of himself to the divine male soul. The divine female twin soul is the embodiment of the moon, and she is more connected to the ethereal. She is represented by Isis, but Isis also has aspects of Venus, especially when Horus is connected with her. The divine female soul is the Holy Grail, and she receives her knowledge directly from God. The scriptures and mythology are all telling the same story, and that is that it is both the divine male and female twin souls that must bring forth divine knowledge together. This is because this knowledge originates in the ethereal realm of the divine,
and as such, males and females are equal in both skills and intellect.
All these aspects of the anima have the same tendency that we have observed in the shadow. That is, they can be projected so that they appear to the man to be the qualities of some particular woman. It is the presence of the anima that causes a man to fall suddenly in love when he sees a woman for the first time and knows at once that this is she. In this situation, the man feels as if he has known this woman intimately for all time. He falls for her so helplessly that it looks to outsiders like complete madness. Women who are of fairy-like character especially attract such anima projections because men can attribute almost anything to a creature who is so fascinatingly vague and can thus proceed to weave fantasies around her. The projection of the anima in such a sudden and passionate form as a love affair can greatly disturb a man's marriage and can lead to the so-called human triangle with its accompanying difficulties. A bearable solution to such a drama can be found only if the anima is recognized as an inner power. The secret aim of the unconscious in bringing about such an entanglement is to force a man to develop and to bring his own being to maturity by integrating more of his unconscious personality and bringing it into his real life.
The young adventurer has now returned to its original formality. This is known as the original man, no longer as a creation of the female, but a being holding the capacity of the female psyche. The purpose of the male is to be a substitute for the female, meaning the male psyche has been designed for a specific purpose. This purpose is to be as a tool, and in this context, the purpose is as a weapon. At this stage, the fully embodied male is now capable of receiving what is known as spiritual enlightenment. Spiritual enlightenment is the ability to communicate or be communicated from multi-dimensions. Spirits, demons, angels, extraterrestrials, gods, devils, or however the young adventurer deciphers what it is that they are being communicated by, should not be judged, but only understood that communication is happening in its form because this is the will of the great work. The path that the young adventurer takes on is the will of the great work, and therefore it is communicated how its path is dictated, meaning that if the young adventurer takes on a so-called evil path, then it will be communicated in a way that they will understand their chosen path. If they take on a so-called righteous path, then they will be communicated in a way that they will understand and relate to its path. In layman terms, the great work is the creator of all paths. However, the purpose of the great work is not to create a balance. The purpose of the great work is to filter what is necessary for the completion and continuation of the great work. If the human race deems that its survival depends on a specific path, then this is a favorable path to the great work, and no other path will be deemed worth continuing. Here we understand free will. The final stage, known as Sophia, is to give the young adventurer a choice. However, because the decision of the great work has already been catered to, the illusion of free will gives the young adventurer the ability to grow, to learn from experience and the experience of others. What must be understood is that the choice of the young adventurer is vital to the endgame.
The unpredictability of human behavior creates the impression of free will. The apparent lack of universality in human behavior seemingly detaches it from the universality of physical laws. And that leads us to intuit that humans themselves are the source of their behavior. But we have as much free will in deciding our next thought or behavior as a random number generator has in deciding its next number. Okay, what about the illusion of free will from our own perspective? Why do I feel like I have free will? Well, the illusion of free will arises whenever our thoughts and behaviors are consistent with our wants and desires. So you feel like you have free will whenever you do whatever it is you want to do. And even if you're paralyzed or physically restrained, your sense of free will is preserved whenever you think about whatever it is you want to think about. So the illusion of free will is all about the brain being consistent with itself. As the philosopher Sam Harris would say, a puppet feels like he has free will as long as he loves his strings. Unfortunately, not everybody loves their strings. On August 1st, 1966, an educated, intelligent, upstanding young man named Charles Whitman made his way to the University of Texas, where he shot and killed 14 people and wounded 32 more. And it was later discovered that he had a brain tumor pressed up against his amygdala, which is a brain region associated with fear and aggression. And in his suicide note, he writes, "I don't really understand myself these days. I'm supposed to be an average, reasonable, and intelligent young man. However, lately, I've been a victim of many unusual and irrational thoughts." So clearly, Whitman had lost part of his sense of free will because his brain tumor compelled him to think and act in ways that he felt was inconsistent with who he was and what he wanted. We have no more control over our brain cells than Whitman had over his tumor cells. And this has moral implications. Free will is the foundation of moral accountability, a defining principle in the criminal justice system. We punish criminals because we believe that they are responsible for their crimes, which is to say that they had the free will to choose not to commit their crime. But when considering the case of Charles Whitman, our moral intuitions tell us that he is less responsible for his behavior because his brain tumor triggered his violence. But once we remove free will from the picture, all criminal behavior is simply a product of the brain and the circumstances that influence the brain. And the idea that someone can deserve to be punished makes no sense. Now, some of you may be worried that a widespread rejection of free will would be psychologically damaging. But this doesn't have to be the case. Without free will, we have no reason to take credit for our success or to boast about doing a TEDx talk. But we have every reason to be thankful for the conditions that enable our success. And we have every reason to be compassionate towards those who were dealt a bad hand in life, including those who, through no fault of their own, ended up with brains susceptible to temper tantrums, brains vulnerable to internet addiction, or brains of psychopaths. Without free will, hating somebody because they cut you off on the freeway is completely irrational. We have no reason to take revenge, but we have every reason to forgive. And of course, this applies to the flip side. Without free will, loving somebody because they spent an unconscionable amount of money on an engagement ring is also completely irrational. But love, although irrational, is still justified because we know as a matter of psychological fact that it is a primary source of human well-being. So to summarize, free will cannot be grounded in logic, science, or experience. We can logically deduce that it is incompatible with the laws of physics, experimentally verify that choice is a product of unconscious neurological processes, and observe through careful introspection that our sense of control is an illusion. And initially, this may seem like a very cynical outlook on life, but I hope to have convinced you that we would be better off as individuals and as a society without the notion of free will. And I'll leave you with one last thought. If free will exists, then our intuitions about the nature of physical laws are wrong. If free will doesn't exist, then our intuitions about the nature of our existence are wrong. And either way, we will be forced to reject that which we had assumed to be true.
Sophia is not a stage. Sophia is a test. The test of Sophia is to expose the will of the young adventurer. Once the will of the young adventurer has been brought out, their nature will fourfold, meaning, once the will of the young adventurer has been tested, they will reach a stage of realization of their nature. Here we understand the purpose of the final stage. Recruitment.